The gentleman is recognized for the purpose for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the beginning of the last Congress, we all remember that there was a concerted effort to remove the phrase, "so help me God," from the oath that is taken by witnesses that appear before this committee to testify. I am actually very thankful, Mr. Chairman, that you ultimately reversed course on that change in our custom, and you reinserted the phrase in our oaths here in the full committee. However, in at least one of our subcommittees, the Subcommittee on the Constitution, ironically, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, where I serve as ranking member, the practice was formally abandoned and denied by Chairman Cohen above my vehement and repeated objections. For that reason, I believe we really do need, and I've offered this in good faith, we need the full committee to specify and clarify this in our rules as other House committees do. Throughout America's history, our founders, presidents, statesmen, and fellow patriots have reinforced and understood that the key and the essential foundation of a republic must be a common commitment among the citizenry to at least the general principles of religion and morality and accountability to God. The founders understood that all men are fallen and that power corrupts, and they also knew that no amount of institutional checks and balances or decentralization of power and civil authorities would be sufficient to maintain a just government if the people in charge had no fear of eternal judgment by a power higher than their temporal institutions. For that reason, I offer this simple amendment, which would adopt here the exact language on witness oaths that I pulled verbatim from the rules of the other committee where I serve, the House Armed Services Committee. It's just 6 lines that should not be disputed by anyone. Indeed, the words here are very familiar to almost all Americans and have been since George Washington added the words, "So help me God," to the constitutionally prescribed oath of office when he was sworn in as president on April 30th, 1789, and soon after that, the Judiciary Act of 1789, one of the first pieces of legislation passed by the new Congress, included the words in the oath of office for judges. You heard the language, I'll say it simply. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before this committee in matters now under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment, which will add certainty to our rules and avoid unnecessary confusion and controversy in our proceedings for the next 2 years. I urge support, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. This amendment is unnecessary because under 18 U.S.C. 1001, it is a criminal offense subject to criminal penalty to lie to Congress whether or not a witness is under oath. So this amendment is completely superfluous as an amendment to the rules. I yield back. Does anyone else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that?
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado. Mr. Chairman, again, we hear that a common sense amendment to the rules is superfluous. If it was, then the question, and really honest, good faith question is, why do almost all the other committees of the Congress have it included in their rules? If the House Armed Services Committee would have it, and the Natural Resources Committee, for goodness sakes, the Committee on the Judiciary, that is supposed to be the committee that upholds our great institutions and defends the Constitution and all of our great traditions, why in the world would we not have it as part of our rules as well? I don't think that the fact that it's admitted, it says in statute that if someone lies under oath that there's a penalty for that. The reason that we have witnesses sworn in for testimony is because we are reminding them. They're not all experts in statutory law, federal law. The reason that we do this in Congress, we do it in committees, is because we have to remind the persons who appear before us of the solemnity of their testimony and what it means. They have to perform this oath, and you have to understand that it's not just the violation of a federal law if they lie to us, that there is a higher power that they answer to. That was the import. That was the reason that the rule was put into our foundational documents in the very beginning, the beginning, the birth of our traditions. They added this really important admonition. And so to say that it's unnecessary, it's superfluous, or it's stated somewhere in law, to me is kind of a silly argument, honestly. And I'm not trying to be demeaning about that. I just think that what you're saying and what you're arguing here is that the witnesses that come before us who are not constitutional law experts normally, they're not experts in federal statute would somehow have the knowledge of that. And simply reminding them of what a statute says is not the same as the oath, and that is why we defend that tradition. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back to me. It was my time, Mr.
Call the
Chairman.
question.
Thank you. And I want to echo the words of my friend from Louisiana. Obviously, there are federal statutes that cover lying to Congress, whether you're under oath or you're not under oath. But there are also federal statutes that cover lying in a courtroom, whether you're under oath or not under oath. There are also federal statutes that cover lying on a tax return, whether you're under oath or not under oath. There are federal statutes that cover lying to all federal officials under oath or not under oath. The reason to make sure that someone has an oath and that they swear to God that they are telling the truth is because they are reminded that far beyond just the federal legal implications, there is a moral implication to what they're doing. And Mr. Chairman, I think of all the committees that we have in this Congress, this committee should be reminding the people that come before this committee over and over again. When we cover things like impeachment, we may very well, for example, have issues involving the president's son and the allegations that the president's son has used his father's position as vice president and may have committed crimes. Those aren't things that we just want to say to somebody, you may be charged under federal law if you are in violation of this. We want to make sure that if the president's son appears or if others appear before this committee in part of our oversight duty, that they understand how very serious it is that they tell us the truth and the whole truth, not having any wiggle room with the words that they use. And Mr. Chairman, there are dozens of other examples of why this committee's work is so important and necessary to have an oath. And I agree with my friend from Louisiana that other committees do it, and their work sometimes is not as serious in nature, not as public, and certainly doesn't have the consequences that the work of this great Judiciary Committee does. When I look around and see the portraits of the past chairs of this great committee, I realize how serious this committee's work has been in the past, and I also realize that we have had oaths administered to witnesses in the past, and to deviate from that practice now, I think is a serious mistake. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Let me say that there will be many moments of eloquence in this committee because we are a committee mostly of lawyers and those who love the Constitution. Mr. Buck is one of those, and having practiced both in the public and private sector, I believe, as well as Mr. Johnson, all have the opportunity to pose questions and to be eloquent during this time frame. Mr. Johnson has expressed and been quite engaged in the matter of the Constitution, and I respect his knowledge. But I want to just acknowledge a simple fact, even beyond the statutory affirmation of lying to Congress being a criminal act. We do require, chairman of this committee, for an oath to be taken. I, as a Christian, I have a great deal of comfort with "So help me God." But I simply want to remind the gentleman that we are a very diverse nation religiously. We are diverse in many other ways. And I would just have him pause for a moment to acknowledge that if an oath is taken and the words "So help me God" are not there, it may be that a person taking the oath is respecting his religion, but no less serious about the oath. And I would just ask him to consider our responsibilities as the Judiciary Committee in upholding the Constitution and the sacred moments of the Bill of Rights that clearly does protect someone's religious freedom. And so there are many things you could say about this, that your intentions are good, but just think about the freedoms of other persons.
The gentlelady
that an
yield.
oath and that an oath, I will be happy to yield, and that an oath taken is a satisfactory oath to adhere to this committee responsibilities. I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I want to point out that she is entirely correct. This is the committee that protects religious liberty. This is the committee that ought to be most concerned with protecting religious liberty. And as the gentlelady pointed out, there are many people in this country who do not believe in God. They may believe in something else. They may be Buddhists. They may be other people with beliefs that are different. And it is our duty to protect the religious liberty of all people, not only those who have what some may consider conventional Christian or Jewish views. So the amendment must be opposed because it seeks to impose a religious viewpoint in violation of the separation of church and state, in violation of our committee's commitment to protect religious liberty, and therefore this amendment must be opposed. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I yield back to her.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so very much.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose? For what purpose does Mr. Roy seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
But I respect the eloquent statement by the gentlelady from Texas, but I certainly am in concurrence with the gentleman from Louisiana about the importance of "So help you God" in our oaths. For the reasons he explained that I needn't to repeat, it is critical in respect to how we pledge our truthfulness, that we are doing so under God. And when this is the Judiciary Committee, and the gentlelady from Texas talked about the rule of law, and talked about this being a committee full of primarily lawyers. And when you think about, we talk about the issues involving the United States Supreme Court a great deal. I've had cases in front of the Supreme Court when I was the first Assistant Attorney General of Texas. We knew the importance of the Supreme Court. And of course, Moses is depicted twice, inside and out, with the Ten Commandments. We talk about our pledge and Pledge of Allegiance, which we debated earlier, and the importance of under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. It is fundamental and central to who we are as a nation. And when we discuss religious liberty, and I concur with the gentlelady of the importance of our defense of religious liberty, we should do so fully. That does not erase faith from the public square. This is an often debated principle, but it is indeed true and important that does not erase our collective belief as a nation from the public square, and our collective reliance on the Almighty, and the importance of recognition of the Almighty when we are pledging to each other, whether it's our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, as it was in the Declaration, or whether it is someone here before this body or otherwise pledging that they are telling the truth. I know that my level of questioning my own integrity and who I am rises significantly in prayer, in church, when I'm putting myself before the Almighty and you're questioning who you are and what you do and what you stand for. I think this is fundamental. It is critical. And it is critical for this body, the whole body, the House, but also this body, this committee, to recognize the importance of the Almighty when we're talking about taking an oath. I would yield to the gentleman from Louisiana.
I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. I just want to point out that Professor Noah Feldman, who is a professor of law at Harvard University, former clerk to U.S. Supreme Court Justice David Souter, has researched this and written about it extensively. You might be interested to know that he affirms, and of course history does, I've followed this my whole life, the words "so help me God" were constantly and customarily used in oaths of office and jurors' oaths in the late 18th century and indeed before. He notes all the history, cites the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1797, that volume, and clarifies the meaning of the phrase was understood differently by different people. The energy of the sentence, it quotes, resides in the particle "so," explained the author of the entry of the oath with grammatical precision. Quote, "upon condition of my speaking the truth or performing this promise, may God help me or not otherwise," unquote. Look, the point is that throughout our history, we've used this. There have been many atheists, agnostics, there have been different sects of Judeo-Christian religions and others who have different beliefs and different interpretations of this. Some may have whispered it silently, some may not have. But the point is, we put it in our oaths and we include it in what we recite to witnesses to affirm the solemnity of the occasion and to point out that there is a higher power. They do not just owe the truth to us, not just to members of Congress, they owe it to a higher power, however they define that. And that is an important tradition for us not to abandon in an age where we all know that truth is jeopardized. It's under assault. Some people can't define truth anymore. It is critically important that people come and stand before this Congress and do that thing, to provide accurate testimony. And I think for us to abandon this tradition now, after 244 years, or however long it's been, part of our history, is a perilous practice.
And if the gentleman, if I
Yield
could
back.
reclaim my time, I would just close out, Mr. Chairman, by saying, you know, we talked about religious liberty, as the gentlelady from Texas talked about, and we talked about these rights that we enjoy. The Declaration laid out very clearly and poignantly by Mr. Jefferson that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's from which they come. And that is the central pillar upon which this nation was built. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes Mr. Bishop seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I came forward in some alarm as I heard the chair's first response that oath-taking, this very common oath that the amendment proposes, is superfluous. And what struck me is that initially was just the extraordinary error of that notion, and that oath-taking, in many respects, is prescribed in the Constitution. Senators and representatives are required under the Constitution to take an oath, notwithstanding that their duties exist in law regardless or before the oath is taken. The President of the United States is prescribed an oath, and it is customary, of course, that it be an oath before God. That's been the choice of most. And then as I heard the debate, I was interested that the chairman, perhaps sensing that error after that point had been so well expressed by the gentleman from Louisiana and others, then adopted the gentlelady from Texas answer that it might somehow offend the notion of separation of church and state or someone's religious liberty. But no, that can't be the case because, again, oaths are prescribed in the Constitution that establishes those very rights, the right of religious free exercise. And so that's another error, and the two errors come in such close succession that one wonders, are these arguments not merely pretext for another concern, for another fear, if you will? That is to say, a discomfort with even the mention of the deity, the mention of God in our official proceedings. Is that perhaps the concern? And if so, I would submit that it reinforces, as nothing else could, the cogency of the amendment proposed by Mr. Johnson, that we can never allow this body to embrace the notion that the mention of God, that the resort to the help of God is at the very heart of this institution as it has been, and of our organizational documents as they have been from the beginning of this nation. And with that, I don't know, does Mr. Johnson wish me to yield?
I appreciate that, and with this remaining time you have, thank you for yielding. I'll just give you the words of George Washington himself, who said in his farewell address, quote, "Where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths?" They warned us, they forewarned us that we should never abandon those foundations. And as you said, I'm a constitutional law attorney. I was a religious liberty defense lawyer for 20 years before I got here. I've argued every aspect of this debate. You cannot say that it is a violation of the free exercise of religion, or worse, an establishment of religion in the First Amendment, if the preceding articles of the Constitution lay out the oath. It makes no sense. It's not a cogent argument to make. The same founders that drafted the language of the First Amendment, okay, when the day that they wrote the language of the First Amendment and agreed upon it. They opened their proceedings that day with a prayer by the Reverend Jacob Duché, Pennsylvania. The prayer was an overt Christian prayer. Okay, they didn't see that as a violation of the First Amendment. They believed in the free exercise of religion. So you can't come in here and make the separation of church and state argument about the oath that we take to the Constitution to defend the truth and to testify in accordance with the truth. This has never been a part of our history, and we should not begin now to make it a new chapter of history. It's a dangerous thing. And I'm not trying to be dramatic about this. I just can't believe that we have come to this place where we cannot follow these most basic traditions that date all the way back to our founding. And I yield back.
With the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman. I yield
Back to
to
you.
Mr. Roy.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I closed out my first statement regarding the endowment of our inalienable rights from our Creator. I mean, keep in mind, as the gentleman from Louisiana was talking about in our founding, right? I went to the University of Virginia. Right? It's all steeped in all things Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Jefferson. And a lot is made of his letter to the Danbury Baptists and separation of church and state, which, of course, was not any of the initial founding documents. It was a letter. It was Jefferson, who is often invoked in this way. It was Jefferson who put, endowed by our Creator with these certain inalienable rights. That, again, I will repeat, is the central pillar upon which everything else was built in the Constitution the gentleman from Louisiana and the gentleman from North Carolina referred to. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Owen seek recognition? Put on your mic.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
What I'm hoping that I can bring to this body as I speak to you is the acknowledgement of great generations that came before us, because we have not been taught that. We haven't talked about the greatness of my race for generations, the things they overcame, the success they've had, the production they put into our nation. The message, the narrative, we went from slavery to one day being free by white people, civil rights. I'm going to tell you, as time moves on, why we were so successful, why we're so competitive. At the end of the day, there was no race that believed in God than we did. Matter of fact, our belief in our Heavenly Father allowed us to say, no matter what you say about me, no matter what you do, I'm better than that because I'm made in an image, a power much greater than the evil is. I think it's important that we recognize today where we find the most danger, the most damage. You look at these communities now, they're nothing like what I grew up in, nothing. What is not happening there? These young people are not taught about God. They're not taught that you close the door, you turn off the light, that you're still going to be seen by a God who has the power to see everything. And they think they can bully, hurt, damage, and get away with it. What's made this country great, the reason why we have such a diversity in religions, is we believe there's a God that we all worship, no matter what religion we are, or no matter whether we worship him at all. And that's the freedom we've given. That's what gives us a latitude to accept each other, because we learn, because we believe in him, that we can look at each other inside out versus outside in. I think this path we're going along is pretty dangerous. We have leaders that cannot say, let's put into our process, so help me God. It's dangerous. And it gives an idea of which direction we're going in. We can't continue to do that. Not if we plan on getting our kids and our young people excited about their future, believing in their dreams, believing in themselves. And this whole thing about racism, guess what happens? The more we believe in him, the less we do of that. Hatred, anger, mayhem ends when we believe in God in heaven. So I hope that you reconsider not voting against this. It's simple. Again, it's not just words, it's an act. We talk about acts. Let's make sure we do the acts that brings us together. This is one of them. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No.
No.
The rules have it.
Recorded vote.